Hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of PolyNerding Out. Today we're going to be discussing the end of an era, as earlier this week Microsoft officially announced that they were pulling the plug on production of the Xbox 360. After nearly 10.5 years, which is an amazing milestone, the Xbox 360 is officially dead now. And that's kind of bittersweet for me. I've been a gamer my entire life, going way back to the dark ages of the Atari 2600. And between then and now, I've owned at least one console in every cycle. I'm talking about the Atari 2600, the 8-bit Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64, the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2, the original Xbox, the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, a Wii for my children, and now, thanks to my lovely girlfriend, a PlayStation 3 and 4 have been introduced into my life. That's a lot of gaming in 30 plus years, and in that time, I've never, to my recollection, seen a console get the 10.5-year run that the 360 did. And there were so many amazing experiences, video games, and memories for me in that console that it's I don't want to say it's depressing, because that's too hyperbolic, but it is very bittersweet to see it officially be dead. Without the 360, I would have never been introduced to the joys and frustrations of online video gaming, multiplayer, competitive, and cooperative. Never done it before. I had never owned a PC rig, never had the means to do it. Hell, I didn't get my first PC in my life until I was already a high school graduate. That's just the way it was for me. I know a lot of people can't imagine living without a computer now. Hell, I know I couldn't. But as a teenager into young adulthood, PCs were a foreign concept to me. So the 360 was the console that introduced me to that style of gameplay, and I couldn't imagine living without it. The 360, and to an extent the PlayStation 3, last console generation, was an amazing cycle, and I feel blessed to have lived during that time to get to experience all those great IPs and properties, from the Mass Effect series to the Halo series, the later Halo series I should say. Even Gears of War here. I love the Gears of War series for its cheesy action over-the-topness. I look forward to the new one, but I'm glad I was able to throw in Gears of War 3 today to record this video, because it's one of those games that was groundbreaking for me, getting to experience that cooperative multiplayer with my buddies, not on a couch like I grew up doing. It's just, I know I'm kind of rambling at this point, so forgive me for that, but it really is a bittersweet thing to think about the Xbox 360 officially being over after all this time and all the joy it gave me. I know I'm not alone in holding this opinion, but I think that the Xbox 360 PlayStation 3 console generation was easily one of the best we've ever got to experience as gamers. And that's not just because graphics were the best they had ever been, or that they were able to tell these amazing stories in new ways that they couldn't before. Because I'll still go back and spend hours playing Legend of Zelda or Super Mario Brothers and have a hell of a good time doing it, even though those games are undeniably not on the same level technically as last console gen or this current gen. But there was something magical about the last console cycle. I wrote an article maybe about a year ago on PolyNerding.wordpress.com. I'll put a link in the description for it, so those of you that haven't read it can, detailing some of my favorite games. One of the things I love about this current gen, though, is that, especially with the Xbox One, is they are giving us a little taste of backwards compatibility. It's not as comprehensive as I would like. There's a lot of games on the list I absolutely have no desire to play, and there are very few that I'm extremely ecstatic to see on there, like Dead Space here, Saints Row 4, the Gears series, things like that. I wrote an article also on PolyNerding.wordpress.com, and I'll post that link in the description as well, of the games I want to see added, like the entire Dead Space series, Mass Effect 2, Bulletstorm. I'm dying for Bulletstorm and Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon to show up on backwards compatibility. I want to stream those games. I lack the setup to be able to stream them on my 360, so I'm begging and just fingers crossed that Microsoft adds all those games as well, because they need to be on the backwards compatibility, just so I can share them. I want to share my favorite games with my growing audience, and those are some of my favorite games that I've never been able to share. And I know I'm kind of rambling again here, but that's something that has been on my mind with the demise of the 360 as a console, is that I now want more of my favorite games to be available. I want Max Payne 3 on backwards compatibility. I want the Dead Space series so I can play through the whole thing again and stream it for my growing audience. There's just, I don't know how to put it any more plainly than that. That like there's just a lot to love about that last console cycle that I want to continue to experience, even though we have moved on to the Xbox One, PlayStation 4 era. So Microsoft, I doubt you're watching. I doubt anyone from Microsoft is watching, but I know I'm not alone in saying, please give us more of the classic games. Don't give us so many Peggles and games like that. Give us games like the Dead Space series, the entire Mass Effect series, things like that. That's what we really want as gamers. Sticking with the theme of backwards compatibility and 360 games, I want to give you a quick summation of my time with Saints Row 4 for the Xbox 360. It was obviously recently added to the backwards compatibility list, and it was a free game in April on the Games with Gold program. So between those two programs, Games with Gold and backwards compatibility, I was able to finally finish a game that I played a couple hours of almost 4 years ago when it initially came out. And to be honest, when it first came out, I rented it. I didn't care for it. I didn't like how they took the Saints Row formula, which, let's not kid ourselves, is the Grand Theft Auto formula, and turned it into a superhero sim. But now, coming back and revisiting it years later, I actually found it pretty amusing in its own way. Like, it's not a perfect game. It's pretty flawed, but it was fun. It was silly and absurd. And by that I mean you play as a street gang leader. You play as man or woman. I chose woman just to mix it up. And you were the president of the United States. A street gang member as president of the United States is absurd enough. But in the opening moments of the game, aliens invade, and they abduct everyone with any potential, the best and the brightest in the world, and stick them in what is essentially a Matrix style simulation for each of them. Like I said, it's absurd. Add to it the sophomore perverted humor, and you've got an interesting combination of a game that plays fairly well with a silly story and absurd concept. I can't give it any higher than a 7 out of 10 though, because it is pretty flawed technically. Even all these years later, with any of the patches and whatnot that have happened, it still breaks a lot. Like I said, it's a superhero sim. One of your superpowers is you can run real fast like the Flash, or Quicksilver if you prefer. And you also pick up the ability over the course of the game to like create a tornado in your wake that sucks things along. No less than 3 straight times I had my stream and game freeze because of this ability. I've also had it stream while I was recording for this video this morning, while I was just blowing a bunch of stuff up. I was in a mech suit blowing a bunch of cars up, and all the explosions and laser blasts everywhere from the attacking aliens froze the game. That's pretty unacceptable. It should have been fixed by now. I mean, the game's almost 4 years old, and for that reason alone, I can't give it higher than a 7. Also, another flaw that's worth mentioning is that there's plenty of side activities to do, just like any good open world game. But the Saints games have always, and it's something I've always hated, at least since 3, they make you do the side quests as part of the story. They introduce the side quests in the story, so that way later you can go back and do them later. A lot of them aren't very fun. They're kind of a pain in the ass. That also keeps the score down to a 7. But 7 is not bad in my book. 5 is a completely average game. 7 is good. Like 6 is above average. You can look on PolyNerding.wordpress.com and see how my rating structure works for reviews, but if you're interested. But it's not a bad game, especially free. I'm recording this on Thursday. You've got about 4 or 5 days. You got till Sunday. I think Sunday is the 1st. It's Thursday the 28th, so yeah, you have till Sunday to pick it up for free. I suggest if you like these kind of open world silly games and you have an Xbox, pick it up. It's worth it. Just don't expect greatness from it. Just expect to have a good, silly, stupid, fun time. But that's going to cover it for my video game discussion, and I'm going to wrap things up shortly with some recommendations. That'll do it for another edition of PolyNerding Out. I'd like to thank you for coming by and watching this week's episode, but before I sign off for good today, I wanted to remind you of the links down in the description for my various social media sites, everything from Twitter to Facebook, and my main blog, PolyNerding.wordpress.com. I would also like to do some recommendations, like always. One comic book I would like to recommend is Ordinary by Rob Williams. I'll have the review up by the time this video posts. on PolyNerding.wordpress.com. But the gist of the story is, in the world where everyone has suddenly developed superpowers and crazy abilities, there is one man who hasn't. He's kind of a loser, for lack of a better term. Not in a, gosh, I hate this guy kind of way, but in a, like, oh man, poor dude. The story of the book deals with him trying to get across New York to get to his son, while all this chaos is breaking out as all these powers spring up in people. It's a heartfelt book. It's a hilarious book, in my opinion. It's definitely worth checking out. Also, make sure you check out polynerd.wordpress.com again for the review that will be up by the time this video is up as well. And I would also like to recommend another YouTube channel, Movieverse. I will put the link in the description. This past Sunday, I was on the Movieverse Movie News Show. Brian's a good friend of mine. I really appreciate everything he's done, both for me as a writer, letting me write for his blog, and for having me on the show. Please check it out. Check out his channel. It's good stuff. There's lots on there. Much like me, he does the unboxings, but he also does trailer reactions and all sorts of movie-related stuff. His channel is obviously Movieverse, completely movie-related, not so much comic book and video game. But check it out. He'll appreciate it, and I will too. And make sure you like, follow, and subscribe over there for him as well. But like I said, that'll do it for this week's episode. I'll see you next week. I'm going to try to do these a little earlier in the week than Thursday, but for now, Thursday seems to be the day I can get these done. But again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.